Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening. Welcome to the show, kicking off for another busy week. The Prime Minister, of course, back on deck on Wednesday. I'll have a little bit to say about that in a moment. Here's what's coming up tonight on Credlin. The big Australia push in full swing, with Australia expected to hit 27 million people by the end of this week. Now, that's 30 years earlier than predicted. Now, the government would have you believe this is good for the economy, but it's not. We're already in a per capita recession, things set to get worse, particularly on the housing front. It's Australia Day on Friday, of course, but you wouldn't know it if you're at the tennis or at the cricket. It wasn't so long ago that flags of the cricket were the Australian way. Only now, those who run the sport have banned even the words Australia Day on Friday. Some in business have gone woke, but not all. Wait till you hear the pushback from the head of Drake Supermarkets in Queensland. Plus, the treaty in Victoria dealt a massive blow, with the Coalition finally removing their support from the proposal, meaning Victorian Liberals now join with Queensland and New South Wales, and of course Peter Dutton in Canberra, to oppose any move to divide Australians by race. And in a flurry, the PM's been back in Canberra. He's called his party there for a caucus meeting to try and reset the agenda and address cost of living. But as many have pointed out, this seems like a costly exercise with little hope of tangible outcomes.
Albanese decides in the dying days of summer to pull all Labor MPs back to Canberra at significant expense, it must be added as well. I hope something substantial comes out of it rather than just, a headline and a media opportunity.
Well, I think the Australian people will be quietly angered by the fact that all these MPs are going back to Canberra to have drinks at the lodge.
But first this week, in 3 days' time, in fact, Australia's population is tipped to hit 27 million. Now, it was only in 2018 that we made headlines for reaching 25 million, and now we're well on our way to the 30s, even with the doors closed shut for those 2 years during COVID. This massive population spike is overwhelmingly driven by migration. And it's not hard to understand why, given that in the last financial year, we took in over 500,000 new migrants, breaking all previous Australian records. Now, as good as migration has been for this country, it would be easier to feel comfortable about this huge increase if those coming in were all joining Team Australia. But it's hardly their fault if some of them are confused about their new country, because too many Australians are, not you and me, but too many Australians running big public companies and sporting bodies, well, they're worried about who they are and what Australia stands for. And just like there were during the Voice debate, these big corporates and big sportos can't decide whether being Australian is a source of pride or shame. Now, that's the issue, isn't it? For any number of people who really should know better. Like the board and senior management at Woolworths, now christened Wokeworth, who ostentatiously last week announced they wouldn't carry Australia Day merchandise because our National Day, they say, means different things to different people. Not that the different things to different people lines ever stop Woolies celebrating other events like Islam's Ramadan or the Hindu Festival of Lights, Deepavali. It's not only traditional Australian celebrations, it seems, though, that induce this wokeness out of Woolworths. Here is John Paul Drake, who runs the family-owned Drake supermarket chain in Queensland and South Australia. He's cranky about the Woolies stand, and he doesn't miss when it comes to his competitor.
With Woolworths saying they're not going to be selling any Australia Day merchandise, that really ticked off the box. Our exec team isn't sitting in Double Bay or in high-flying high-rises. We are actually listening to what our customers want. And it's very clear, our customers want to be able to purchase Australia Day merchandise.
Each year, it's almost as if there's a rhythm to our cultural self-loathing, a whole set of hatreds and angst that roll around with the calendar. We're supposed to feel guilty about racing Spring Carnival because activists tell us the industry's cruel to horses. We're then supposed to be embarrassed about Christmas because, surprise, surprise, it's Christian. And no sooner is Christmas over than we now get a good 4 weeks plus of Australia Day bashing prior to January 26. All that's needed is for the footy codes to start examining their white privilege or the toxic masculinity of contact sport, and we could end up with a whole year of feeling guilty. Today, Cricket Australia joined Tennis Australia in cancelling Australia Day. The Daily Telegraph reports the Brisbane Test match with the West Indies will now begin with a ubiquitous welcome to country, and that on Australia Day itself on the Friday, they will, and I quote, mark it in passing with a ground announcer saying very much this day means different things to different people. Cricket Australia, well, they won't acknowledge Australia Day. Indeed, the term Australia Day, the paper reports, will not be used. That's right, Cricket Australia has banned the words Australia Day on Friday at the Gabba. Instead, we're told Cricket Australia is, and I quote, keen to promote inclusivity and respect from patrons, regardless of their views on the date itself, which is widely viewed as a day of mourning by Indigenous people. Now, seriously, could you imagine the baseball in America dumping its 4th of July fireworks, or the US Open banning displays of the Stars and Stripes flag? And sure, there's a few of the usual suspects who keep talking about Invasion Day as part of the guilting of the rest of us into supporting a professional activist class, largely on the taxpayer. But most Aboriginal people, like the vast majority of Australians born here or recently arrived, who regard this country as blessed, regard it as, well, worth something celebrating on the 26th.
Australians are just over it. You know, they're more worried about the cost of living. They don't want to have to deal with the corporates trying to tell them how to suck eggs, tell them how they should behave or think or feel or, feel about the country that they love.
So that's why Cricket Australia, including Chairman Mike Baird, pandering to this left-wing cultural Marxist nonsense by getting all coy and virtue signalling about our National Day doesn't make sense. Now, I might add, this is the same Mike Baird who's just been lamenting that today's political leaders lack conviction, and I quote, they don't do what they believe in. Now, Baird had no issue with Australia Day when he was the New South Wales Liberal Premier, so what's changed? It certainly is not a view shared by Baird's successor, Labor's Chris Minns.
Australia Day is the 26th of January. It's an opportunity for us to come together and celebrate the fact that we live in the greatest country on earth. I think they should revisit it. I hope they do. And I know I'll be celebrating Australia Day, and millions of other people after a tough couple of years will take the opportunity to spend time with family and friends as well.
But where Minns was strong, the Prime Minister was weak when he was asked about Cricket Australia today in an interview with Sky News.
I think we need to stop looking for areas in which we can be outraged. We need to come together. Look, people will go to the cricket, people will celebrate, or for some people, for First Nations people, I respect the views that they have.
I mean, come on, people trying to dump our National Day, fair enough we can be outraged. The Prime Minister never actually answered the question. He just dodged it in his usual style, pretending to be all things to everyone, but in the end, standing up for nothing. In fact, it's the sheer gutlessness of Albanese's attacks on Australia Day that have really ticked people off, allowing local councils to ban it by stealth, sitting by and watching state governments like this one in Victoria cancelling traditional parades and calling to an end community events. But the PM still wants us to think he supports our National Day. Here is leading Melbourne Breakfast Show producer, broadcaster Ross Stevenson, who nailed it on radio this morning.
It's like this. I'm not going to do your work for you, government. You're the one who's declared it Australia Day. Right. If you don't have the guts to come out and say it's not Australia Day, I'm not going to do your work for you. Right? You decide whether it's Australia Day or not. Right. You have gazetted it as Australia Day. Therefore, on Friday, I am celebrating Australia Day. Right. If you have the guts to do what you really want to do, I get it, which is change the date, change the date.
I'm with Ross Stevenson there. If there's one thing we learned last year with the massive defeat of the special Indigenous voice, it's that Australians don't like our country being divided and they don't like being guilted about the past. Now look, on Wednesday, you, the taxpayer, will fork out around $500,000 to fly Labor MPs and their staff back to Canberra for a day. Labor's early caucus meeting is designed to give the PM a photo op, a bit of a stunt, prior to his speech to the National Press Club on Thursday. And to ensure, of course, he's got plenty of colleagues in the room, lest the Press Club look empty. And for Labor MPs anxious about their electoral prospects, given the government's dismal recent record and the PM's obvious lack of mojo since he lost the voice, there'll be also morale-boosting drinks at the Lodge on Wednesday night. Now, the government's tried to put itself in the clear with taxpayers by stressing that the Labor Party would fund the drinks at the Lodge. But it's still hitting up taxpayers so it can have a choreographed discussion about cost of living relief that the PM already knows will be in his speech to announce the following day. Now, this is the kind of thing that makes people very cynical about politics and despair about our lack of better government. One of the items we're told is on the caucus agenda is the much-promised Stage 3 tax cuts that I might remind people are already law. They were passed in the Morrison government era and they're due to hit our bank accounts on the 1st of July. Now, this is not money from the government. Let's be clear, these are tax cuts. So this is just us being allowed to keep a little bit more of our money for us to spend rather than send it all to Canberra for government to waste. The PM said before the election that these tax cuts were safe.
Are you still committed to delivering those tax cuts, no levies, and
we're committed to delivering,
given the budget strife that we're in?
Yes, Kieran, we're committed to delivering what we said we would. And I've said on the Stage 3 tax cuts that they've been legislated. People are entitled to operate on the basis of that certainty.
But in recent weeks, he's started to wobble. Indeed, late this afternoon, 2GB Radio in Sydney is reporting that the tax cuts, as promised, are dead.
Stage 3 tax cuts. The Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is about to overhaul them. Now, this is the plan that I'm told will go to Cabinet tomorrow. The top tax bracket will remain at $180,000. So if you earn more than $180,000 a year, you will get $6,000 a year back under this plan instead of $9,000. If you earn less than $180,000 a year, you will get a couple of grand more than was what was promised.
Now, I know how the government's going to spend this. It's giving more cost of living relief, it'll say, to poorer voters by giving less to richer ones. But make no mistake, any change to his pre-election commitment to keep the Stage 3 tax cuts in full would be yet another breach of faith by the PM. Out of touch and now looking like he's unable to keep his word. Not a good place for the PM to be halfway through this first term. All right, let's get the headlines now. From Canberra, Sky News political reporter Olivia Casely.
Good evening. The government is poised to announce a fresh cost of living package as Anthony Albanese recalls Labor MPs to Canberra for a caucus meeting. The Prime Minister has tasked Treasury with coming up with some ways that relief could be delivered without exacerbating inflation. It's a wicked problem for the government that's going to require a nifty solution.
If we can find ways to put extra dollars in people's pockets, particularly those low and middle income earners who are doing it tough, then we're prepared to do so.
Caucus will tick off on the response on Wednesday in a special meeting that's happening before the parliamentary year begins in earnest. That in-person discussion involves bringing Labor MPs back to Canberra 2 weeks early. They have faced some criticism for the cost of that exercise.
It's about $500,000 to bring the Labor caucus to Canberra, the airfares, and overnight what's called travel allowance for people staying overnight on Wednesday night. The main reason for that seems to be so they can go to a party. So Australians, I think, would reasonably have some questions about the cost of this exercise.
Labor says it's a prime example of the opposition being negative. There is also some speculation this evening that Cabinet will be presented with potential tweaks to the government's Stage 3 tax cut policy. Nine Media is reporting possible changes could include increasing the tax-free threshold but keeping the top marginal rate at $180,000, meaning that cohort would get less than promised. It's a measure that's due to come into effect in the middle of this year, but has been a contentious piece of policy due to fears it'll exacerbate inflation.
We would absolutely need to see the detail, but it is a backflip on the election commitment that the Prime Minister made to the people.
Can you confirm, just regarding tax cuts, can you confirm tax cuts as legislated will come into effect on July 1st?
I can confirm that we haven't changed our position.
Ukraine has upped its appeal for an urgent humanitarian shipment of Australian thermal coal. Ukraine is now asking Australia to match a similar shipment of almost 80,000 tonnes of coal in August 2002 that cost taxpayers about $30 million.
I think it's still being under consideration. We still haven't received an official reply to that request. I believe that would be the right thing to do.
They say it's essential to their war effort and for keeping the lights on as Russia dials up its attacks. The Prime Minister appears to be mulling that decision over.
And this energy request, are you open to that?
Well, we make decisions based upon a considered response. So
on the Taipans, the helicopters. Why do we not send those?
Because we take proper advice from the Australian Defence Force.
Well, more than 50 press conferences tallied up today, interviews and media stunts since mid-December by the Prime Minister. Is any of it changing your mind? Joining me now to discuss this, Sky News host, National Affairs Editor at the Daily Telegraph, James Morrow, and columnist and senior writer at the Herald Sun, Patrick Carlines. Gents, I'll start with you if I can. James, polling has shown consistently now the PM's out of favour with voters. In recent polls, he's been as close as 50-50 with the Coalition. Some have actually had the Coalition ahead. Shocker of a year last year. We went into Christmas with that detainee crisis, Airbus elbow that was dogging him as well. We know that there is now a confirmed date for that Dunkley by-election, Saturday the 2nd of March. So he's got his skates on. He really needs to claw back ground. He can't afford to lose that by-election. Fair amount of damage control. You can see today with this move on the caucus on Wednesday, the likelihood this afternoon confirmed that Stage 3 tax cuts have gone. He's throwing everything at it, isn't he?
Well, he is throwing everything at it, Peter, but what we're seeing here, I think, is something that we've spoken about many times on this program. The fact that Anthony Albanese, his basic modus operandi is very reactive. You know, he doesn't get out ahead of things. He had that problem with The Voice. He had that problem when Hamas attacked Israel. He's had it multiple times throughout his government. And now, again, with cost of living, we're seeing the same thing. It's not like people haven't been saying this for 18 months now, that cost of living was a big concern. And now he's just now calling everybody to get together and say, oh, well, let's have a chat about it. Let's see what we can do. And it sounds like the big upshot from this is going to be a big broken promise. And I think that this is going to be worn very heavily by Labor. And I think particularly it's going to be a problem in some of those teal seats, you know, that voted to get rid of the coalition and now going to wind up very much bearing the brunt of this policy change.
Patrick, we know last week that it was 12 months ago that they looked at the idea of a grocery review. Labor knocked it back. Now under pressure, you know, cost of the tills going up and up and up. People are demanding action. They've been forced to backflip on that. We know with the power bill promise, $2.75 off a power bill, that's a broken promise. We look likely to see something now happen on these tax cuts as well. The issue today out in terms of data is rent. I mean, this is extraordinary. Rents are up 40% in Sydney, it says, 70% in Perth, 45% in Brisbane. By the end of the week, and I'll get to that in a moment with my next guest, 27 million people will live in this country. So all these migrants are coming in, but our housing stock clearly can't keep up.
That's right. I mean, you just got to look at the data, Peter, as you said. I mean, since the start of the pandemic, I think Australian wages have gone up 10% across the board. Rental prices in Sydney and Melbourne are 25-40%. You're going to Woolies and you're going to Coles and you're paying $2 for a tomato, and you're filling up the car and you're paying more and more. This is this should be front and centre of any Albanese powwow this week, this rental crisis. It hasn't happened overnight. You've got the population growth in areas which is exacerbating the problem. This is a really big problem because these are people who have nothing to fall back on. I know people who can't afford to stay where they are as renters, but can't afford to move because the rents have gone up so much. This is a really big problem.
James, the PM hit out today. It claims he's bringing back his MPs to Canberra on Wednesday for little more than a media stunt. Now, I call it a stunt because we know there's a likelihood of a cost of living package going to Cabinet tomorrow. He's then got a speech on Thursday. The speech is already written. He knows what's in the speech. So this is just a pick-fack on Wednesday. And when he says, oh, well, it's not going to cost that much money, not $500,000, that's ridiculous. Well, I had a look at air flights today from Perth. A business class seat one way from Perth to Canberra on Wednesday, that's already bigger than $3,000. Just one way. It's $900 one way from Melbourne to Canberra. You add in the travel allowance, the cars, the drivers and all the staff that will come with these MPs. I think $500,000 is perhaps undercooking this cost. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that gets punters angry, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it really does, Peter. And I think there's a really interesting way that we can think about this sort of thing. Put it in the context of the broken promise, or what we think might be a broken promise on tax cuts. Now, you just said that $3,000, that was a one-way airfare from Perth to Canberra. Now, there's some chatter that the shift in what higher income earners will receive back from bracket creep is going to go from $9,000 to $6,000. So what you're basically saying is if you're one of those earners, then potentially all $3,000 you've been asked extra to kick in was used to pay for the flight of one MP from Perth to Canberra, not even to get them back again after the barbecue at the lodge. This is the way people need to think about the just ridiculous spending that this and, frankly, every government does, and say, no, we demand a lot better for our money.
Patrick, I went to the tennis. Terrific on Friday, but they've got a Pride Day, they've got a First Nations Day, they've got a Disabilities Day, but they're not doing anything on Australia Day. And we find out today that Cricket Australia has actually banned the phrase Australia Day on Friday at the Gather. What do you make of this?
Well, the idea that Australia Day is a dirty word or a dirty term, I think most Australians would sort of stop and say, hang on, what are you doing? It's more controversial. This is more controversial for not recognising Australia Day than it would have been if elements had got upset by greater recognition of the day. I think there was a Roy Morgan poll out today that showed that 68% of Australians think that Australia Day should remain on January 26. And where that's interesting is that's actually up from last year. So if you look at the last 12 months, you look at all the hand-wringing and all the goings-on with the voice and so on, it's almost as if some Australians or a lot of Australians are actually saying, hang on, enough is enough. And they certainly don't want Cricket Australia or Woolworths or any other sort of entity telling them how they should think on their behalf.
James, I'm going to ask you about DeSantis pulling out today out of the US presidential race on the Republican side. But I mean, you and I can't imagine the US Open dumping the US flag on the 4th of July. I'm ashamed that people will watch our big sporting events on our national day and it's basically banned that we can have a flag or have any celebration of the wonderful country we are. But give me a view on that one. But also DeSantis, that was shock news today, wasn't it?
Well, the DeSantis thing wasn't really all that shock news. I mean, we knew that he was drifting in the polls and that his campaign was never going to catch fire. So really it's now down to Trump versus Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley seems to be the sort of the corporatist kind of candidate, almost of a female Mitt Romney. And I don't think she's long for this campaign either. I think every supporter is now swinging around behind Trump. But on the Australia Open and the cricket and Australia Day, I just, I come from America and I'm a proud American and I'm a proud Australian, Peter, and I've traveled around the world as you have. I can't imagine any other country allowing the simple act of a national day of celebration to be run down, whether it's the 4th of July or Bastille Day or some country's Independence Day, letting people just run it down, this small minority of constant malcontents out there just saying, oh, no, we have to feel bad about absolutely everything that ever happened. Until everything is all resolved, then we can't have a barbecue. I think, come on, people are over it, and they voted no to this stuff last year at the referendum too. So I really think all of these boards and corporates are all barking up the wrong tree.
Mm. Hey, just a quick comment on reports that Trump has all but ruled out having Nikki Haley, if it comes to this, as his running mate. What's behind that?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at the attacks that he's been delivering against Nikki Haley, you know, they've been that she's pro-open borders, that she's pro, foreign policy interventionism everywhere around the world, that she's basically the corporate big money candidate. And I think that that's where that's all coming from. So there's a bunch of other candidates who are potentially in the mix here, are much more, likely. And I'm hearing everybody from Tulsi Gabbard to Tim Scott from South Carolina, all sorts of people, even maybe Vivek. We don't know.
All right, we'll watch this closely. Thank you both for your time. All right, on Thursday, as you heard me say, our population is expected to reach 27 million. Now, that's well ahead of predictions in 2002, which forecast we wouldn't reach 26 million until 2042. Now, that's, of course, thanks to an annual migration that's well over 500,000 people last year, the biggest population bump ever in our history. So what lies ahead? Well, the man with the numbers and the answers is social researcher Mark McCrindle, and he joins me now. Mark, obviously this isn't a precise figure, but pretty close to the mark. Give us a sense of what goes into your calculation.
Well, the Australian Bureau of Statistics put out these quarterly population updates, and it's solid numbers just looking at our growth, and from there we can do some projections. But, there's two key factors of population growth nationally. First is natural increase, the births minus the deaths, and that is the smallest part of our growth at the moment. The far largest part is the other growth area, and that's net overseas migration, and that's permanent arrivals minus the permanent departures, and that at the moment is 83% of our total annual population growth, hitting new records. So that's really what's driving the population increase.
The government's quick to say, of course, that a growing population is good for the economy, but we've got to this milestone 30 years earlier than we had thought. So schools, hospital, all the infrastructure that supports a population of that size hasn't sort of caught up. We haven't planned for this sort of growth. What effect does that have?
Well, we're dealing with the problems of that now. I mean, you're exactly right. This first intergenerational report in 2002 said that we wouldn't hit 27 million until 2054. And here we are at 2024, about to hit it. That's the problem. Because, of course, land release and zoning and infrastructure planning, road and rail, that takes a 20 or 30 year time horizon to plan. And so if we're now dealing with shortfalls on infrastructure or housing, that's because all of the planning has gone off the wrong numbers that was saying we would be slowing our growth. Instead, it's been accelerating and hitting new records. And probably more to the point, the problem is that we've massively overshot or grown the growth factors through policy compared to what the model said, and now we're having to play catch up. The demand is greater than the supply, and Australian householders are paying the price.
Some criticism today by experts saying that yes, there's been this great increase in migration, but we're not getting the migrants with the skills we need. Under 200 visas last year for people to work in nursing homes. That's a big shortfall. Not enough trades coming through, not enough plumbers, not enough electricians. We know, of course, we've had this huge ramp up, ambitious plans to build all these new homes. We've had a lot of construction industry firms, 1,600, we learned last week, go to the wall in the past 6 months. They're looking for workers and trades, etc., in this sector to keep it going. Are we not careful enough in the visa types we're inviting into Australia?
Well, that's right. I mean, this is not targeted migration in the best possible way. Now, a big proportion are overseas students coming here to study, which is a great earner for the universities. You've got skilled visas coming in, but it's not as tightly targeted as we might think, as you've said. And we're way above what even has been the recent average in permanent arrival net increase of about 230,000. Here we are at 518,000 net increase in migration in the last 12 months. And it hasn't really been targeted where the need has been. And as for the housing, I mean, you're exactly right there, because the 624,000 population increase, based on 2.5 people per household, which is what we have in Australia, census data tells us that, we need 250,000 new homes per annum just to cater for the growth that we're seeing. So over 5 years, that's 1.25 million new homes that we need. And this target, the 5-year target currently, is to develop 1.2 million homes. So we're even falling short of what we need just based on the current 5-year growth, and that doesn't deal with any of the existing demand that we have. And that's all to say that even if we achieve the build numbers that are projected, the 1.2 million homes in 5 years, even if, and there's lots of questions about it, we're still not going to even accommodate the current growth that we're seeing, let alone the existing growth. And two ironclad laws of policy and population and housing in Australia is we always fall short of the development of homes and the target, and yet we always overshoot the population increases, and that's our big problem.
Mark McCrindle, I love the data and your analysis, so thanks for bringing some facts to the table tonight. All right, see you next time. All right, after the break, still to come, reports that Labor's going to backtrack on its promise for those legislated Stage 3 tax cuts. So how worried should you be? Plus, a win for common sense as the Victorian Liberal Coalition says no to the treaty. Welcome back. Well, it took a while, but even the left-wing Liberals in Victoria seem to be waking up to the dangers of treaty agreements. More on that shortly. But first, as mentioned earlier, it's clear the PM's desperate to reset his government as we kick off a new political year. It's also clear that Anthony Albanese has finally started to understand how hard cost of living pain is hurting families and those on fixed incomes. A hastily put together caucus meeting set for Wednesday. Lots of cameras there. You won't miss it on Wednesday night television. And the PM then to make a big speech to the National Press Club on Thursday, where we now can expect both handouts and a scrapping of some of the promised tax cuts. Top of the agenda, of course, is that speculation that Stage 3 tax cuts legislated will be dumped. To discuss this, I'm joined by now the Shadow Treasurer of the Liberal Party, Angus Taylor. Angus, thank you for your time. Well, we heard him all the way through the campaign. He's been asked repeatedly in recent weeks. Yeah. He says those tax cuts would be delivered. They're on the table. Some weasel words started to creep in. I think that made you think and me think and others that are on the chopping block. But we know now from City Radio this afternoon, it looks like they will be dumped. If they go, these tax cuts, what will be the impact?
Well, thanks for having me, Peter. Well, the important point here is that this Prime Minister's word means nothing. His promises are absolutely meaningless. And in terms of broken promises, this one's really egregious. It's in a really long list. $275 for electricity bills, no sign of that. Cheaper mortgages, no sign of that. He wasn't going to touch superannuation, he wasn't going to touch franking credits. But this one's right up there. And I'll tell you why, Peter. Because the Prime Minister and Jim Chalmers promised they wouldn't touch these tax cuts 70 times. They are in legislation which was supported by the Labor Party. And these tax cuts have gone to 2 elections, Peter, and at the last election, both Liberal and Labor supported them. This is a Prime Minister. He says one thing, he does another. It's all politics. He's unbelievably desperate, and now he's wasting more money by getting his caucus turn up in Canberra because he hasn't done anything on this for 18 months. He spent the last year focused on his ideological voice, dividing Australians. Now he's discovered there's a cost of living crisis. Well, we all knew that some time back, and he's going to act. And he thinks the answer to a cost of living crisis is an ideological class war. This is what you get with this Prime Minister. I've got to tell you, Peter, this one is really, it will test everybody's patience, and it should, because he is completely out of his depth dealing with an inflation crisis.
We've got now a confirmed date for the Dunkley by-election. It's in early March. Now, it looks to me that he's going through the budget. He's wanting as much cash as he can get his hands on to splash around in the campaign in that seat. Now, that says to me perhaps he's spooked, that the issue of cost of living is really biting him. He's being, called out for not doing enough when the Voice was on, being just focused on the Voice. But he's going to come out and argue, isn't he, Angus, that these are just tax cuts for the rich. Will he get away with that?
Well, he'll say that. He'll ignore the fact that he's broken a promise. He'll ignore the fact that 70 times he told Australians, he and the Treasurer,
told Australians he wasn't going to do it. He'll ignore the fact that he voted for them. He voted for them in the Parliament, Peter. He'll ignore the fact that they've been to 2 elections. Look, this is a Prime Minister who can't be trusted. And I tell you, when it comes to inflation, Peter, Labor has all the wrong instincts. You're absolutely right. He's looking for money to throw around. But throwing around money is not the way you do it. You know, many of your viewers won't realise, but Labor has spent an additional over $200 billion since they came to power. That's over $20,000 for every Australian household since they came to power. Manage your spending if you want to beat inflation. We know that from the 70s and 80s, the last time we faced this. But this is a Prime Minister who can't deal with that. He's run out of money, so he's chasing yours, and that's exactly what he's doing with these extra taxes. And I have no doubt he'll keep going.
10 economists were in the Australian Financial Review, leading economists weighing in on how's Jim Chalmers, your opposite number, doing at the moment. They said he's timid particularly in relation to tax reform. There's also a lot of business leaders out today saying the conditions are akin to a recession. We've also then got the calamity of these strikes on our ports, the risk with the militant Maritime Union and DP World. The word today in the print media is that this is costing us $80 million a week. Well, we understand that. But that the impact on the economy of the port issue in Australia will be worse than those shipping blockades in the Red Sea. I mean, things are pretty crook, aren't they?
They sure are. This is a treasurer who is not fighting for a strong economy. He's failing. We've seen the real disposable incomes of Australians go back by over 8% since Labor came to power. So that's unprecedented, Peter. We've never seen that before. Australia's pay packets, the purchasing power of their pay packets, are being smashed by higher inflation, higher mortgage payments, and of course higher taxes, a 27% increase in personal income taxes since Labor came to power. We've got rampant immigration. We just heard about it a moment ago, way out of line with our housing supply. Our ports are now being struck by industrial disputes, and Chalmers is not standing up against that. His idea of competition policy is crony capitalism, where he looks after his mates at Qantas, and he allows the Prime Minister to spend all of last year focusing and wasting money on his ideological voice. It's not a treasurer who's standing up for a strong economy with low inflation, and that's what we need right now.
Angus Taylor, thank you. Right now to Victoria, where the push for the Indigenous Treaty has been dealt a major blow after the state opposition, Liberals and the Nationals, dropped their support. The Coalition previously supported a bill to begin the treaty process back in 2022. But on Sunday, the leader of the Nats in Victoria, the Shadow Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Peter Walsh, told Sky News that the party had changed its position amid growing concerns about cultural heritage issues.
We have had internal discussions, and we don't believe we should proceed with treaty until issues around cultural heritage, until issues around the Traditional Owners Settlement Act are actually resolved.
So just to be clear, the Coalition in Victoria no longer backs the treaty process?
No, we don't.
Joining me now, someone who called it right at the time, former Victorian Liberal MP Tim Smith, who crossed the floor on this issue back in 2022. Tim Smith joins me now from London. Well, you were the only one, Tim, who took a principled decision on the issue of treaty. You've been proven right now. You were right also on the tone that Australians took in the Voice referendum on this very issue. So why do you think it took your colleagues so long to come around to this view?
Well, good evening, Peter, and I am very, very pleased to see that the Victorian Liberal and National Coalition has decided to finally oppose this terrible treaty. When I got up in the party room in June 2022 and informed my then colleagues that I was going to cross the floor, one of my key arguments was that I had just got off the phone with Senator Jacinta Price, and she told me that she thought that a state treaty was a ridiculous idea. Now, I won't name names, but a few of my colleagues at that stage had not heard of Jacinta Price. And after her maiden speech the following month, in July 2022, a few more of them have heard of her, but it's one of the best speeches I've ever heard. And then post the Voice campaign, where Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine and Tony Abbott and a whole host of other great Australians led the campaign for unity against division, And finally, the Victorian Liberal and Nationals have woken up to the fact that we don't want to be divided by race in our country. We're all Australians. You can't make a treaty with your own people. It's that simple. And hearing Peter Walsh's language over the last couple of days, they still haven't got the messaging right. They're talking about processes and this act and that act. And, well, no, it's really simple. You can't enter a treaty with your own fellow citizens. We're all Australians. Didn't the Voice referendum teach us that? It did. Overwhelmingly so. We don't want to be divided by race in our own country.
So what happens now without the Libs? I presume you'll tell me, is this treaty dead in the water? And is there any chance, given that you're right, the Libs' main criticism is all about process, it's not about the fundamental principle that this is wrong. If the government goes out of its way to address some of the process arguments, are the lefties in the Liberal Party going to drag them back into this treaty at the next election, do you think?
Well, the Labor Party are obsessed with dividing Australians by race. And this is identity politics, it's divisive, it's woke tokenism, and it's wrong. But unfortunately, there are those in our own party, in the left of our own party, who share, at the very least, a concern that if they don't support these sort of divisive, woke, tokenistic initiatives of the Labor Party, they might lose their inner urban seats. So, yes, I'm sure at the moment there are inner urban Liberals who are not happy with this decision. In fact, I know they are not happy with this decision. So watch this space as the various different groups and factions have their say on this, because I'm sure they're not happy about it, some of them. And I suspect there's more to be said about these matters internally over the next couple of years.
Hey, just before we go, given they've seen the light in relation to a treaty, do you hold out any hope that they're going to see the light in relation to some of Victoria's really outrageous gender laws, particularly in relation to children?
One can only hope. One can only hope that that the silent majority spoke during the Voice referendum. And what I hope that the Voice referendum showed the Victorian Liberal and National Party is that if you've got the ticker, like Peter Dutton did, to oppose something that is fundamentally illiberal and fundamentally wrong and fundamentally contrary to the principles that Sir Robert Menzies set our party up to argue for, then in the public square, you'll actually do all right. And you might actually win the day. So show some ticker, have some courage, stand on your principles and argue for the great mainstream of Australian society who don't want these divisive and frankly wrong initiatives foisted upon Australian families.
Tim Smith, thanks for joining us. I know it's early in London, but appreciate your time. All right, after the break, more indoctrination of our children. This time, toddlers in childcare are being taught that they live on stolen land. Plus, with almost no official announcement, Labor's made some big changes to our visa system. More on that shortly. All right, let's just bring in my panel straight away. Nationals MP Keith Pearce, Sky News contributor Gary Hardgrave. I'm bringing you in straight away because I cannot believe they think we're so stupid, Gary, that we would fall for this. We heard all that speculation before Christmas that Linda Burney would be dumped, that she performed so badly in The Voice that there'd be a reshuffle and that she might end up, God forbid, the Governor-General. Well, there's a story planted today. Tom Calma, the Indigenous activist, one of the Voice architects, is out there saying we must have our first Indigenous Governor-General to replace David Hurley, who has a term coming to an end this year. And about now, the conversations are held with the King about who might replace Hurley. This is what this is about, because they need to do their reshuffle and they've got to push her out of the parliament and give someone else the portfolio.
Well, it's pretty pathetic, and that's simply worse reasons, although I think Bill Hayden was a victim of a similar approach years ago, and the late Bill Hayden went on to be a very good Governor-General. But look, Peter, this sort of divisive tribalism kind of stuff is just rank. This is what the Labor Party does. The left love to divide us into groups and put us into little tribes, and then put a gatekeeper in front so that one doesn't talk to the other unless you go through that appointed gatekeeper. Look, I've known Tom Calma since he was an advisor in Philip Ruddock's office 20-something years ago. He's gone on, he's picked the wrong side of a lot of arguments ever since. He seems like a nice sort of a bloke. But then they've got people out now on social media trying to promote him as the Governor-General of Australia. I mean, this whole thing is nonsense. We have had Australians as Governor-General appointed by by process of merit, great Australians that have brought people together. They're a non-political figure. They shouldn't be a political figure. They should be people who bring the country together. And this process demeans the important position of Governor-General. And it should not be for the convenience of Albo's latest crisis. This sort of conversation gets promoted. But, you know, they'll do whatever they damn well like, and they don't really care what any of us think.
Keith, what about the self-hatred of Australia being pushed even on little ones? We've got reports out today that some childcare centres are holding daily acknowledgement of country. Now, I can't see that some kid that's 18 months old even knows what country is,
absolutely.
But they're being taught they're on stolen land. This is, this is just sad.
Peter, I mean, these are kids flat getting their pants on the right way round. No matter get indoctrinated with this sort of rubbish. And where is the proposal about how great our country is? Why aren't they talking about that? And, mate, to be honest, it doesn't stop there. I had a school teacher send me some parts of a proposed curriculum in the last couple of weeks. And it included things on, you know, multiple genders and Invasion Day and everything else. And this was not for senior kids. It was for grade 3 at primary school. And I think every parent out there, they just want their kids to be able to know how to think, not what to think. They don't want them indoctrinated. They want the basics of life, read and write and do all the things that they need to be part of our community. And I just think this is appalling and should be stopped.
Absolutely.
Gary, you used to be an immigration minister. We hit 27 million on Thursday. They're the official stats. But in and around all of this debate on immigration, we find out today, that's 30 years ahead of time, I might add, the government has quietly ended what we know as the Golden Visas scheme. Tell us more.
Well, I always thought that Golden Visa scheme had a reasonable chance to be of some merit to Australia, in the sense that, imagine if Bill Gates, aged above 45, doesn't have a skill that Australia's short on and wanted to come to Australia, he wouldn't be allowed to migrate here. So that Golden Visa scheme was meant to be for those sorts of people. But the way it's been enacted, they've just taken whoever fronted up first with the cash. And so we've ended up with a propensity to get out of one part of the world, mainly out of China. We've ended up with a whole flow of cash into Australia. So it's been poorly run. The concept was reasonable. It's been done by a lot of countries around the world, Peter, and they put a pretty big amount of money up there as the minimum sort of entry fee. But this is a government now that gives no reason for anyone to migrate to the country. There's absolutely no compelling case for anybody with the skills we want to actually migrate here, because we've got nothing big happening. We've now got the most expensive electricity in the world, the highest rates of personal income tax compared to many other comparable countries like Canada and the United States. You know, we have nothing compelling to sell, and we're competing with Canada and the United States for people from other places to come here. And they're just looking at us and say, you guys are up yourselves. I'm going somewhere else. So I think that what the government's done here is just a further admission they've run out of ideas. And yet what they're bringing is a volume of people who don't really necessarily bring anything. Peter, the real statistic that scares me is that 1 in 36 people who are in Australia today weren't here a year and a half ago. 1 in 36 people in Australia today have come in the last 12 months. That frightens the crap out of me, pardon the French.
What about coal, if I can, Keith Pitt, your former portfolio? We know that the Ukrainians asked us back in December for coal. They need it for the winter. They need it in their fight against Russia. Sorry. They also wanted helicopters that we're going to break up and bury, for God's sake. We still haven't even bothered to get back to them. You listened to the Prime Minister on radio last week. He says, I'm this close to my Ukrainian counterpart. We talk all the time. Surely a bit of courtesy. Surely we can get back to them, whether we're going to give them coal or helicopters or old bushmasters. It's getting beyond a joke.
Oh, Peter, this is just ridiculous. I mean, the deal we did originally, and I did that with Scott Morrison, of course, to deliver coal because they desperately needed it. They were down to 30-day supply, for example. And you imagine in a war-torn country you lose your electricity as well. How has it taken this long? I mean, why isn't someone on the phone? Where is Anthony Albanese? Ring an Australian provider. These shipments are actually booked out months in advance. It's actually quite hard to get Australian coal out of the market into a ship and across to the Ukraine. And they desperately, desperately need it. Why wouldn't you help them? And the biggest criticism I got at the time, Peter, I moved too quickly. far too quickly delivering aid that was asked for by the people of Ukraine that they desperately needed.
Hey, just quickly, I've got about a minute left, but Paradise Dam, this occurred over the break, Keith. It's in your electorate. We're not going to fix it anymore. We're going to completely walk away from this dam. Why is it a problem?
Oh, Peter, this is an absolute disaster, and a Labor-made one. The idea that this thing will be rebuilt anytime soon, I think, is wrong. There is no way they intend to do it. In fact, what they intend to do is take $600 million out of the federal budget and $600 million out of the state budget and make it a budget-saving measure. And the people of my district, they will pay the price. There's a stand off for you, Peter. Yeah. Come any time you like. We'll give you first-hand experience.
I'm going to come up your way because, I mean, I remember that really rich horticultural industry that was put there in Bundaberg on the promise of secure water supply. Now that's gone.
Absolutely.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's wrong.
All right, got to leave it there, gents. Keith Pitt, Gary Hardgraves, thanks as always. See you next Monday. That's it for me. We're going to have a little break, and then Andrew Bolt after the break. See you tomorrow.